So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. As Gareth said, just want to echo our welcome from Jersey Road. Great to have you with us. And we put on this event really with two main objectives. Firstly, we really want to encourage you in what you're already doing. There's so much expertise in this room, already doing great things in the area of storytelling. And so this is to encourage you in a lot of what we're going to say, but also hopefully prompt you and challenge you to think outside the box. Where are the trends going? What are some of the ways that we can help ourselves as a team in your organizations, your charities? We'd love to help you do that tonight with this panel. For those who I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Liam and I'm the Marketing and Communications Officer at Jersey Road. And it's my privilege to have our expert panel here this evening. So let's introduce to them who you have here. So we have Tim Levell, who's Programme Director over at Times Radio. Tim, great to have you with us. We have Alexandra Davis, who is Director of Marketing and Communications at Pilgrims Friend Society. And we have Sarah Greenwood, who is Head of Media at Tearfund. So already you can see we've got a real diverse panel, going to bring lots of expertise. They're all delighted to be here and excited, not nervous in the slightest. And just to let you know how this is going to run, we're going to have a three-parter tonight. So we're going to have our first initial burst. And the question we're going to be looking at is what makes a good story? I'm sure you're all keen to know that. And then we're going to have a Q&A. So quick break and Q&A there. And then we're going to pick up after that, get into the practicalities of what is it actually like working for these charities in the field. What are some of the obstacles? What are some of the opportunities? Hopefully equip you guys there. And then finally, we're going to look forward to the future. We're going to look at trends that are upcoming. Is storytelling changing? What's happening in the media landscape? And how can we keep up with that changing landscape? So that's the direction we're going. But enough of me. I'd love to hear from you guys. Just initially, Tim, let's start with you. Why are you so passionate about storytelling in your role?
Well, thank you very much for having me. So I run Times Radio, which is a live news and radio station, basically the radio station, The Times and Sunday Times, if you weren't aware of it. It launched 3 years ago. And I don't want to do a long biog, but I just thought I should say that I've worked for quite different bits of media. So I've worked for 5 Live, so national radio. I've worked for TV. I was editor of Newsround. I was editor of Blue Peter. I've also worked on the BBC News website, on BBC Breakfast, on Sky News. So those sort of places, local radio as well. So obviously keen to kind of hear your questions. And, we'll try and draw on different bits of, I'm sure we'll all try and draw on different bits of experience to help. I think the thing is that people, it's a truism, is that people love stories and they just want to be captivated. And I also think that people are really, we see on Times Radio, it's much more kind of news and politics, but also stories really work kind of great, particularly when there's jeopardy, when people want to know what's going to happen. And I think that, if in a story, if you sort of know not just how the beginning's going to be, but the middle and the end, it's just not very interesting. So just to apply that directly to what you might be doing, or certainly what we do on Times Radio, is if you know what a guest is going to say when they start, it's just not very interesting. Or if it's sort of set up by the presenter and you sort of know where it's going to go, it won't hold your attention, won't be compelling. And we see that in terms of I'm kind of roaming around some topics here, but the Ukraine war, when that broke out, we had our record listening because people didn't know if it was going to be World War III in Europe, and that just really captivated people. But by the same token, if you've got a guest or you're doing a story, and if you're intrigued, I love the word intrigued, I think that's really powerful. I think you should always think when you write something, does this intrigue me? If you're intrigued by the medical condition the person's talking about, or how, you want to know what happened to that person or how it turned out, then I think you've got a story.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tim. Alexandra.
Hello, everybody. So yes, I'm Alexandra. I work for Pilgrims Friend Society. I'm going to just co-opt your data here a little bit. Can I just get a show of hands if you've heard of Pilgrims Friend Society?
Yes.
Okay, not bad. All right, great, good. And my colleagues, good news. We care for older people, particularly in Christian communities, predominantly through care homes. We have housing schemes as well. And we've been doing that work of caring for older Christians for 216 years, so since 1807. So that's a quite a legacy to be kind of trying to continue and to press on with. And just thinking about stories, I guess it's kind of, there's twofold. When you were talking about jeopardy, I was thinking, when you work with older people and you're telling their stories, jeopardy all the time, because how's that going to go? Never quite sure. It's wonderful. But there's this sense, the kind of the deep sense of story being about our connectedness as human beings, and particularly as we think about getting older, connecting to people as they're older and to their stories and to their history, and where do we fit and how do we take that on, and legacy and all that kind of stuff, and honouring people as they get older by listening to their stories. That's really, really vital and really, really important. And then the kind of cold, hard light of day, one of the things that I'm responsible for overseeing is marketing, and stories sell things, and ultimately we want as many people as possible to come and live with us and to benefit from the communities that we provide. And that means essentially selling a product, and actually selling that through story is a really, really deeply powerful way to do that. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Sarah and Head of Media at Tearfund, and I don't know if I'll do a show of hands because that might be... Thank you very much. So Tearfund is a Christian international development agency. We're working in more than 50 countries around the world, doing emergency response, but also a lot of long-term church and community transformation. For me, stories are absolutely key to show the impact of Tearfund's work, and by having really great stories where we're bringing alive the people that we're working with around the world, it means that we can build awareness of Tearfund, we can help grow our fundraising and help grow our influence, which is really important. And I just love finding a brilliant story that's just like, oh yes, this is going to be the one that journalists is going to be interested in, and it's going to be a real flyer. So yeah, that's why I love a good story.
Great, thanks, Charles. That's really helpful. Just a snapshot of why you're here, what you're doing, also different. I hope you appreciate just the depth of knowledge you guys have. It's going to be great for us this evening to bring that out of you. And I thought the best place to start really is we can't go too far into capturing stories, the practicalities on the ground, before we actually nail down what makes a good story. Because without that, none of us would be here. And I think that's something that actually resonates with all of us, brings us together tonight, is that all of us are interested in producing great content. We're all trying to capture what is going on in the world. We're all trying to make a difference for the positive, for the good. And so we have to start with that. And I thought this would be a helpful topic. I've written down here, I think I have a great case study. Now, I don't know if we've ever heard that before. Colleagues have said, you know what, I've got it. I've got the thing that's going to break through. We're going to be on Sky News tomorrow. Just you wait till midday. And I think that's a really important question to ask ourselves. How do we know when we actually have a great case study? I'm confident that most of us have either been guilty of doing that, thinking we actually have a story when we don't, or we have seen that from the flip side, which Tim's going to testify to in a moment. But there can often be such a fine line between what I think is a great story, what we do, and then in reality, do other people actually also agree that this is a great story? Because that is the key. So Tim, I'd just like to come to you. I'd like to come to you on this, and this is not to put you on the spot, but have you ever come across something like that in all of your years? People coming to you with, Tim, I've got this story, you're going to bite my hand off for it, and actually think, oh, I'm afraid not.
Yes. So do you want an example of a good case study or a bad case study? What are you looking for?
Let's start with the bad, please.
Okay. Well, I think what's interesting is that so if you're telling a good... I'm going to think quite a bit about 5 Live actually on this, because 5 Live did quite a lot of this stuff. And what's interesting about the stories is that the kind of classic casting for us was to have 3 guests, which was the campaigner, the expert, and the case study. And that really gets you, because the campaigner gives you the passion, the expert gives you the factual context of the thing, and then the case study just tugs at the heartstrings and makes it very relatable. And that works well, particularly kind of for medical type stories, but also it can work for the kind of more. I was talking to someone from Open Doors earlier, and you can work for those sort of things where you've got the the campaigner from Open Doors who's really passionate. I'm sorry to pick on Open Doors. You might have the expert, which might be someone who's an academic who's studied the issue, or a kind of an MP who's a bit more dispassionate, and then someone who's caught up in it. And that, to me, is great casting. But if you think about the case study, I think the ingredients of a good case study are there are a few things, and so I think that, I mean, we can talk a bit more about this, but just a few things that, I'll do the things that I'd make a bad case study. The things that make a bad case study are, they're not good talkers. And that's really important, particularly on radio, but I guess in print as well, which I've got less experience of. But they've got to be able to express it well. So if you've got a choice between someone who's the absolute pinnacle of what you're trying to talk about, but doesn't express it very well, and someone who's a bit like not quite so absolutely nailed on, but just speaks, powerfully about it, go for the person who speaks powerfully, because they're just going to get it across, and the quotes are still going to be great, because you can mop up the other stuff in the wrapping, and so they've got to be able to speak about it really powerfully. I actually also think that, particularly in radio, you do want people who kind of intelligible. You don't want kind of too strong accents, because that's quite hard to navigate on radio. And just one more thing, and maybe I'll shut up we can come back to this if you want. They've got to be there. I mean, they've got to be able to. What's amazing with 5 Live was if you can get people into the studio or get them to a place where they can be, where they can actually talk. But the number of times I'd get a press release from a charity, and they'd say, and this is not so much the case study, they go, to talk to us, here's the person. And you'd ring them and you'd say, can I have that? And I'm so sorry, the chief exec's got loads of meetings today, can't do today. Can't. But you put the story out today, why is the person not there? Or the case study, oh no, I'm sorry, they're a teacher. We can't get them out of school. It's like, if you're going to offer a case study up, make sure they're available, sort of slightly obvious, but there we are.
Yeah. So Alexander, for you, on the other side of that, coming from the charity point of view, is that something that you would recognise in your teams or yourself, where it can be a bit of an echo chamber? You have to be careful not to just think, well, everyone in the office agrees with me, therefore this is going to be a hit.
Yeah. The days when everyone in the office agrees with me is a great day. I think it is that sense of going outside of yourself and your echo chamber or your team, and looking at it from outside and saying, yes, but is this interesting? So if you want a kind of a case study that didn't, or a kind of a situation that didn't really do anything, was earlier this year, we had one of our care homes is in Jeremy Hunt's constituency, and we ended up organising a visit for him to come to the constituency the week of the budget, which was obviously the budget where we were going to correct the economic disaster that we'd ended up with last autumn and all the rest of it. It was a big week, and we were like, this is great. Jeremy Hunt is coming to our care home. We did this. They were so good. They did this prayer, wisdom tree thing. They had him come in. The old people sat around and we talked to him, and they gave him a little budget box, and he held it up, and we took some photos. We had this great. We got a professional photographer there to take some nice pictures, and it was lovely. And there was absolutely zero coverage. None of the journalists wanted to come, and nobody. I think there was one reprint of the press release online. And that's because in reality, Jeremy Hunt coming to a care home is not a story, right? It's not a story. And because his office were no questions on anything kind of Chancellor related, because he's being a constituency MP today, the journalists were no thanks. Which very quickly on reflection, we were yeah, okay, fair enough. That isn't a story. Alternatively, when we've been able to do things that actually have caught a bit of a zeitgeist, that's been much more productive. So, a good story.
Good story.
This time last year, some of our care homes were doing intergenerational nativities. So they were getting schools locally, or Sunday schools, or that was the aim, nurseries, people to come in, and they were going to basically do kind of a tableau type thing for a nativity, and you'd have kids and you'd have older people. And our home in Plymouth, Bethany, we ended up having 2 camera crews from ITV and BBC Local News in this little lounge while they had 10 kids from the local school, and I can't remember how many, of our family members, as we call people who live with us, kind of all crammed in trying to do this lovely kind of nativity. But the thing that I remember about it was that at least some of them had masks on, like the full kind of visor face covering. And actually, I think what it caught was we're not in COVID anymore. We're out of COVID, and particularly within the care sector, which took longer to come out, went in quicker, took longer to come out of COVID. Actually, people kind of caught the Christmas spirit, and then they caught the post-COVID kind of Christmas spirit, and they caught the intergenerational side of things. So you had some quite cute kids talking about the chocolate that they'd received at this care home. But we also had two people in the care home, a husband and wife, who were both teachers, and they were both interviewed, and they gave lovely sound bites around how moving it was. And because they'd been in schools and stuff throughout their lives, they gave these lovely little sound bites. The kids were cute, and everybody had a wonderful time, and it went out on 2 local regional stations. We had some more coverage on radio and print, and so it really captured the imagination, partly because there was a big picture, partly because there were some small touch points, and it was a story. It caught us off guard, but we're really grateful for that. Yeah.
So Sarah, just literally carrying on from what Alexandra said there, you do put it around the office, great story, you go out, and like Alexandra said, sometimes it just flops, does not go anywhere, you don't get any take-up, journalists are thinking, sorry, there's nothing we can do with this. In a team like Tearfund, obviously global reach, big team, how would you navigate that as someone who is head of media? Are there certain things you would say, here are the next steps? And practical examples for us, because it will obviously happen. Not everybody's going to take every story. Yeah. So what's the next step then to make sure, okay, let's proof this so it doesn't happen again? Yeah. And where can we change things?
Yeah, so I think as a team at Tearfund, we spend quite a lot of time understanding what journalists are looking for. So we'll spend a lot of time networking with journalists. We've spent time mapping who we know, what are their interests, what would they like to know about. We're also held to account often by journalists within our team who are just like, that is a rubbish story. I'm like, oh, right, okay. So I think that is really useful, that we've got a couple of people who've worked in newsrooms who are just like, this is what this is looking for. They would never run a story like that. So that's been really useful to help us kind of hone our skills. I think we spend a lot of time explaining to people what makes news and what doesn't make news. So this can be our team going to other team meetings. It can be speaking to regional comms officers. But we also do a lot of scanning and horizon scanning of the news to work out what's topical, what's not topical, what's relevant for us. So then we're feeding back, okay, when you go and see a disaster scene, this is what we need. Or when you're speaking to this community, this is what you need. And we're really trying to get people to incorporate that and use every opportunity, because, we can't afford to be sending people out here, there and everywhere to gather stories. So we're trying to equip people to be able to do that. I don't know if I've run ahead to our case study gathering, but
that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, so we're trying to equip everyone to be communicators, to gather stories, and we've got certain people who are really brilliant at it, and then other people who aren't. Those will be
to put it nicely, to put it nicely. No, I just think this is helpful, because I think from a charity point of view, organisational point of view, it can feel, like we've got everyone's buy-in here in the room, but I think it's so helpful for Tim to just model for us what it looks like on the other side when you're receiving, I'm sure, countless pitches, lots of emails, similar stories, and you have to sieve those through and think critically what's going to best serve our audience. So Tim, just would love from you maybe 2 things we could do for quality control that would make your life easier on the receiving end, just to think, right, how can we sense check this within our teams here in the charity sector so that when it gets to you, some of those things that you may think, right, that's going to be a cross against it, we get rid of that. It becomes more inviting for you and your teams. What would you suggest?
I think most importantly, I would focus on what is new, different or special. What's new, different or special? And then make sure that is right at the top. And because journalists are fundamentally, they get bored easily, quite superficial, but they themselves, we get a lot of email pitches, and I think we want to know, is there a nugget of something here that will intrigue, to use that word again, intrigue our listeners or readers that just feels compelling or captivating or a bit different. And so I think what you want to do is so I just written down some do's and don'ts. Is this my do's and don'ts time? Can I do that? Because that will help phrase it.
You give us a couple do's and don'ts. We'll save some back, but
okay, I'll let you go. So I've just 3 do's, 3 don'ts. I'd say do think about them, not you. So think about, what is the the organisation you're pitching to, what do they want, not what do you want to get across? It's a fundamentally different thing. A bit later on, I've got an example of a case study story we did on Times Radio last week and why that was good and why that worked, but partly it was because it chimed with the presenter's interest. And you mentioned about the importance of networking with journalists, and you've got to find out what floats their boat. I said, do give it a reason. And I know I'm from a news network, I'm sorry about that, but you've got to think about why now, what's topical about it. Does it tie in with next week the government's going to think about this thing? Is it to do with Christmas is coming, so blah de blah. So give it a reason and do get to the point. I've got some things, I've seen some pitches where actually the thing that is special is buried in the 4th paragraph. I really am not going to read the 4th paragraph. And then my 3 don'ts are, don't leave it too late. I sometimes do get really great stories and it says, this is happening tomorrow. And it's like, we haven't got time, our timelines can't set it up. And so I think if you can make it seem like, we'd love to give, sometimes I'm quite intrigued by, I'm quite drawn by those very cheap tactics of like, I want to give you something exclusive for you and we're tipping you off ahead of time. I mean, I like all that, I'm a sucker for that. And then, so my don't leave it too late. Don't suggest people who are no good. I love this topic. I can say more about spokespeople and CEOs if you want me to. And then my last don't is, I like this one. I wrote this down. I don't know what it means. I said, don't blame it on the sunshine. But I think what I meant was, I was trying to think, I thought, that's good. What do I've got to think of a reason for that. I think what I meant was, if it doesn't work, it just might be, don't blame it on the sunshine. Don't blame it on the fact that something else is happening. Just, it might not have been the time for it. And just, go again. Actually, your case study or your story, you might be able to kind of cook them up again and repitch it in 2 months' time, 3 months' time, dressed up as something completely different. And most people won't notice. I mean, I can't tell you how many emails journalists get. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so you just look at a quick glance. So is that what you want to know?
No, that is helpful. I'm going to follow up on that, actually. Okay. So you said there, quite often things are put way down on the pecking order in the paragraphs. People aren't bold up the top and give you the value head on. For you, what's going to first grab your attention that's going to be, if you're wading through lots and lots of emails, I'm assuming emails are still the best format. You don't want everyone here taking you out for coffee and meals. Would you still say email? Maybe a silly question. Are emails over phone calls, over other ways of getting hold of you, is that still the best chance to get something through?
I mean, emails are the best way in. But if you meet people, then you kind of, and you build up a connection, then that you get their stuff and so one of your team, Sarah's got hold of my email address and has met me. And then as sort of says, Tim, I'd love to let you know about this story coming up next week. And we met last week and I sort of was slightly more beholden to not delete it quite so fast. And no, that's mean. That's mean. I don't mean that. I pass it on to producers who can make something with it. But I think, what was the question? Sorry. The question was, what's going to make me read it more?
So in terms of the approach,
I think it's. I'm trying to think of an example of media that doesn't have deadlines or timelines to think about, and I can't really think of something. So I think the number one thing is that sense of tapping into something that is in the ether or coming up, because Christianity magazine, I imagine, their lead times must be, their Christmas one's gone to bed. They must be thinking roughly about coming up to March time, mustn't they? Easter, Valentine's Day. And so I think everything, if you're pitching to them, I'm just guessing, but you'd go, I'd love to, I've got a great story about springtime, or something that ties in with something coming up, or it might, and you see. So I think something. I can also tell you that I realise I didn't finish that previous sentence, but I'm starting a better thought. I can tell you, so my team, Times Radio, is about 80 people, and really good emails get sent round the whole newsroom. And the ones that get sent round is when it's very clear, like, it's about something timely, like commenting on the autumn statement, commenting on the new series of The Crown, looking ahead to a thing that's happening this weekend, with a very clear, good spokesperson attached who's going to deliver. And that's what gets sent around, because people go, that's useful. So that I think, just to kind of summarize all of that, what piques, I think, the interest is when you can see it's got a good peg, good focus, and there's something there that is, as I said a bit earlier, new, different, special, rather than just feeling like a bit samey, a bit kind of, can I talk to you about mental health issues? It's like, I mean, we've done mental health issues now for 10 years, and that in itself is not going to grab me, but as the government's mental health bill passes into law, we've got a great story of someone whose life is going to be transformed by the act. Ooh.
Yeah. Okay. One final comeback, and then I'll stop interrogating you.
Okay.
So
I'll be quick.
You've said to me previously that you can tell from a mile off when you have a tailored pitch in front of you, and when actually it's been sent out just like a generic, let's see how far we can get this. How much of an issue is that, and what is it that you instantly think, no, you've not tailored this enough to me? Is it not understanding your audience? Is it the way it's addressed? What is it that you're looking for to make you think they understand me and my audience, therefore I'll give them the time?
That's a little bit hard. I'll be a little bit hard because, if you're emailing cold, you've got to be sort of relatively generic. But I think it's just understanding, just something that shows you've understood what the audience is. I would say it's better to send 5 emails to 5 outlets where you know what the audience is than 100 emails cold, which are just a bit generic. And that's what I'd say.
Okay. Yeah, Alexandra, Sarah, just love to hear your feedback. Any of those do's and don'ts, any thoughts off the back of what Tim said there in the last few moments? Keen to know.
Yeah, I mean, I know as a team, wanting to get to know journalists really well, understand what their audiences are, making sure we're hitting them with exactly the right information, that we know their audience. So, and some of our case studies can be a bit like random. It's something happening in a country that no one's really heard of. Why is it of interest? So it's making, how can we overlap it with what their audience are interested in? So then it's making the stories that we have relevant to the audience of that outlet. And that can be a real challenge for us. And sometimes we have a spokesperson who can just really bring that alive. And then we also invest in our spokespeople quite a lot to make sure that we are really having some excellent people that journalists will come back to us for. And, we know that this person can deliver. We know that they'll say something edgy. We know that they're available. We know that the press office will hook them up with us really easily. So those are some of the things that we focus on.
I think all of that. I think this sense of packaging the things together is probably something that's really important that we've kind of developed and learned how to do a bit better. And that can be really challenging because it can be really hard to have a good story. And again, as I said, older people, we went through a phase where we weren't really sure if something was going to work on the day, because some days are good and some days are bad when you're really quite old. And sometimes it's how you wake up in the morning. And actually that can be a real challenge, to package everything together in a way that allows the authentic voice to come through. But alongside the expert, having the right person in place who's going to be able to do the expert view, the manager or carer or somebody like that, and having people, and in that context, people who are not spending a lot of their time thinking, how am I going to become a press person? How am I going to, these are people doing incredible work, but they're not necessarily interested or skilled or experienced in speaking. So packaging those things together can be quite tricky, but when you can get it and you can get it to work, it can be golden. So.
Brilliant. Okay, let's just finish with a practical example. We're going to stop the end of this section in a moment. We'll have a Q&A. But just before that, I've briefed you guys to just maybe share with us one case study example, either from fundraising side of things or from cut-through and news coverage. I think between you, you're going to do that. Just an example for us to think, right, practically I can get my teeth into that. I know how you've done it. Could you just talk us through a particular campaign or story that you guys have run that's just really made waves, and just give us a bit of insight on that? Someone's fundraising, someone's coverage. Over to you guys.
Well, firstly, all of our coverage drives awareness and builds for fundraising. So thank you.
I told her. I did tell her to say that, yeah.
So recently there's been some big UN talks all about plastic. That was happening in Kenya last week. Several months ago, a colleague in the team spent time training waste pickers to be spokespeople. So one of the things we were campaigning around was rights for waste pickers. And as she was training them, this wasn't just to train them up, it was also to vet who's going to be my best spokesperson here. So she identified this guy called John, who lives in Nairobi, who as a child started off being a waste picker. Now he is representing waste pickers at the UN. So I was just like, back of the net. So John also is an excellent spokesperson. And so we took his story to The Guardian. The Guardian did a big whole profile of him. We were then working with The Guardian to say, okay, so the previous talks, it looks like waste pickers are not going to be invited in. They've restricted passes. So we were able to go back to the journalists and say, John can tell you what this is going to mean to the community. Nice piece of coverage. In the run-up to these talks, we had put together a stat all about the amount of plastic waste that is gathered in Africa, and I can't remember what the stat is. Plus, we had lots of African church leaders who had signed a letter to the leaders of the conference. And in the run-up to it, John was also chosen to be one of the Time 100 next people. So last week in Nairobi, the talks happened. We had the Time journalists go out to Dandora Waste Tip and interview John, see all of the work that's going on there. We had spokespeople at the talks, and we had coverage in The Guardian again, in the Daily Mail, in all sorts of outlets. And then we had a beautiful photo gallery published in The Guardian on the Friday, which was fantastic. And then yesterday we had BBC World Service doing a podcast, a focus on Africa with one of our spokespeople. So John has been a top case study. And just when you hear that story, you're like, this is amazing.
Yeah, that's really encouraging. Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. Alexandra.
Now I'm going to follow that.
Yeah.
I know, that's a good
that was a really good story.
I gave you the chance to go first.
That was an error. That is a great story. That's brilliant. Congrats.
Thank you.
Just kind of bringing it back to kind of more local focus. And just affirming what Sarah said about all coverage leads to profile and therefore funds and whatever else you're marketing. We had a good bit of coverage earlier in the year around the coronation. So again, for us, that's kind of our vibe. You know, we were able to, BBC Look North came to our home in Harrogate, Emmaus House, and they interviewed one of the family members there who had been but remembered the Queen's coronation, and we did those kinds of stories. I can't remember the full details, I'm sorry. But she had some photos, so they had some nice shots of her and I think her son looking at the photos. And she was kind of, again, this kind of two-level to stories for us. What's the community story? And that community story there was, we're having a party. Great. And for coronation weekend, we're having a party. Works. That was nice. But then there was also this kind of closer to home, personalised story as well. And again, so it was another nice bit of local coverage. And that is one of the things that we really go for. We love a good bit of regional or local coverage because they're the people that we're talking to in order to say, come and live, work, volunteer at one of our homes or housing schemes. And so that really worked for us in that context. It was a lovely bit of coverage.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. That's so encouraging. And just as we come to the end of this mini section, we trust that's just been helpful in maybe seeing some of the do's and don'ts, some of the main areas where every charity organisation has challenges, but actually there's so much opportunity. And I'm sure I'll speak on behalf of you guys. You'd be happy to, share more on that with others in their own time. And Tim would always love to be taken out for dinner if you want to particularly get a story anywhere. I can't say no to that. So we're gonna pause things there and open up quickly for a Q&A. So Sarah, if I just steal that mic from you, Priscilla, if you just can dance around the room, thank you. We'd love to open this up. If anybody has a question on any of the topics we've covered so far, then we would love to hear from you. If you could just start by saying your name and your organisation, and then it's
Hello, my name's Michael. I'm a brand and marketing strategist working for an agency called Why It Matters. I'm curious about the role of the objective at the start and how that sets and changes the storytelling. We've mentioned the idea that stories can raise profile and they can create fundraising. How does the nuance around the objective change the story?
I mean, I'll just, from our perspective, we've always set a strategy. Overall, our fundamental aims are to ensure that people can come and live with us. So they need to know about us in order to be able to do that. And they need to know about us when they need us, essentially, because when it comes to particularly care, that's often quite a last minute quick decision. Few people these days put their names down on waiting lists. Hard as we try, they won't do it. So for us, that objective sense of we need people to know about us. We need people to be able to refer back to us in that moment. Means that what we're trying to do with our stories is create them very much around the thing that they're going to need. And the thing that they're going to need is care, but it's community as well. So that sense of that objective does mean that that's the kind of story that we want to tell. And we'll tell the stories of the people who live with us, because it's those human stories that deliver the big picture of care and community, which delivers the message of come and live with us.
Great, thank you.
Can I just one tiny quick thought? It may not be relevant, but I always think, what's the one action you want someone to take? Because I think most media outlets will do some, they recognise you've helped get a story, but, is it you want them to sign a petition or give some money or visit, but just focus on that, make sure everyone's aligned and everyone knows the same thing. And another thing I was going to say while I was thinking about it is just in spokespeople. Do, insofar as you can do, train your spokespeople to mention your charity in their answers. Because the number of times charities ring us up afterwards and say, you didn't mention us. And that may be fair, that may be a fair cop. And, and then you have to kind of go on and in radio you can fix it. You can say, an hour ago we spoke to this person. We should, and they were from this charity. But if the person coming on, either the case study or spokesperson, whatever, if they just kind of make sure they say the name of the charity, not do it, but it just helps because that's much harder to get rid of.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Tim. I think I saw a few other hands. Thank you.
Oh, hello there. So I'm Helen. I work at Pilgrims Friend Society alongside Alexandra. So my question is kind of for Tim, really. So I was really interested when you said you need to have good spokespeople who will come across really well on the radio. How do you then kind of honour people who are marginalised, perhaps people for whom English is a second language? How do you capture their voices? Because their voices are kind of the ones often that are crying out to be heard. So if I can expand a little, we've got lots of people who have come to join our organisation from overseas as part of the government's sponsored scheme, but there's a lot of jeopardy there. The government's talking about cancelling it because people are being exploited. So how do we get their voices heard if they aren't fluent in English, can't articulate in the way that you as a journalist would want a kind of crisp soundbite?
I think I've got two thoughts on that, two ways of helping with that. So the first is that depending on what the outlet is, if it's a broadcast thing, you can pre-record stuff, not do it live. And if you pre-record, and that certainly works on TV, film with people, because what they can then do is they can just extract the best 30 seconds, kind of cut it together, and they can help make it good. It might be hard work for the journalist, but and certainly in radio you can do the same sort of things. I think try and try and get them in a situation where the journalists, particularly if they understand the limitations, I think you need to say up front, but you might want to say, this person absolutely, he or she's absolutely, they're brilliant, but it's going to be quite hard. They don't find it very easy, but think about how the production techniques that would enable that to happen. The second thing is that just do it along the lines of have a great spokesperson who advocates them and represents them. But what you want to do is make sure that it's clear that he wants to tell the stories of a couple of people. And you want to kind of try and prime the journalist to ask about that. Because then what can happen is that you could have your spokesperson say, I'm thinking of this person, I met them recently, and they just tell their story. And so they get their voice across by proxy. Because I think also then, if you're thinking about it in terms of people watching at home, listening at home, you also want those people at home to be most moved and motivated and galvanized and kind of impacted by what's said. And if they themselves at home are actually struggling with it, sympathy might evaporate a bit, or attention might evaporate. And so that doesn't help you. So I think it's better to be upfront and say, we've got a great story. Or the other thing you do, I thought of the third thing actually, is you could kind of somehow package it up for them. So you could film them, whatever, and you could say, we've got this great story and we'd love to, we've got this 60-second thing that we can offer you where this person in their own words. And actually that's quite nice, because then they can say, you could be on, it could be TV, regional radio, whatever. They could say, before we meet this person, or they're chatting to this person, the spokesperson from your charity, and you say, and actually, I know you've been out to meet so-and-so, or let's hear a bit of their story, play it in, you've done it really, really well. And they say, that's really impactful, isn't it? And then they chat about it. But I think because you've got to carry the audience with you. And if the audience sort of somehow disengages, then you've lost.
Excellent.
Okay. Sorry, guys, just for sake of time, if I could just ask you to hold those hands. We'll revisit at the end with the Q&A. We'll be back in a sec. Sorry, Priscilla, I don't think I was clear there. So you're going to keep it there. Great. So we're going to move on to our second session now. These are going to be quick-fire sessions where we're going to talk about the practical realities of what it's like story gathering on the ground for both UK-based and global organisation and charities. And there's two main topics I'd love for us to briefly touch on here with the panel, which is first internal communication and how important that is within your teams to maximise then going out and getting the best stories you can. And then secondly, so we've done communication and internal capacity. Now, I understand we're all organisations, different sizes, means, budgets, territories, wherever we are. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can maximise both of those areas, no matter whether you're on tight strings or whether you feel like you have lots of resource. Hopefully there'll be something of value in this for you. But Alexandra, I want to come to you first, because we've spoken previously and you mentioned to me that putting people in the right places, especially in your organisation, has been critical in allowing people with certain strengths, expertise to go and do what they do best, and you've seen the results of that. Could you just speak for a minute into the practicalities of that and why that's so important? Yeah, so we've definitely seen real growth and development in our ability to gather stories with some changes within our own kind of structure. I'd say there were two really significant things that have happened. One is that out and about, particularly in our care homes, we have a role that's developed over the last 3 or 4 years, I think, technically, and has really come into its own post-pandemic. It was not easy to do this job in the pandemic because it's the activities and community engagement facilitators, which when you can't engage in a community is tricky. But post that kind of part of recent life, we've found that that's a role within our care homes where we call them ACEs, obviously. They are, part of their responsibility is to understand who everybody is who lives with us, the family members who come and live with us, understand their life history, understand their likes and their dislikes, understand if they like to get up early in the morning, if they like toast for breakfast, if they absolutely cannot stand pulses, so that would be me, things like that. Or used to be a teacher, so loves to kind of
do something teachery or was a brilliant administrator, and so give them a task to do in the office every kind of once a week, do some filing or something, that kind of thing. And they are brilliant at knowing who is going to help us with the story. So when it comes to gathering stuff for example, remembrance, they'll know if somebody did something or experienced something significant. I mean, largely we think about World War II. We don't have, World War I is now out of our kind of living memory, I guess, and actually World War II is increasingly out of adult living memory. But those are the people who know the people and want to tell their stories. They also love those people, care deeply about those people, and they want to tell their stories. And the second thing that we did was within my team, Helen here, she has oversight for press now, and that was something that we changed, I can't remember when, exactly a couple of years ago maybe, and that helped us in the way that we were working, particularly with Jersey Road. It gave us a point person internally who could be a really solid conduit between what we were doing with Jersey Road on the external PR and press side of things and what was happening in the homes and what the ACEs were doing. So having those two key kind of areas of work has really unlocked the stories, the storytelling, and then the story sharing.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really helpful. Because, I'd love to get a bit of a comparison here. So obviously, Sarah, Tearfund, we're talking global here in terms of reach. So communication for you guys really is critical because you've got time zones, you've got people all over the map. So for you, what are some of those keys, almost similar to Alexandra there, where you make sure you've got the right people, but also the line of communication, what we're trying to capture, how we're doing it, make sure there are no gaps, things like consent, make sure we're watertight on those things. How does that play out in a huge organisation like Tearfund?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very big organisation, but it doesn't mean we've got lots of resources dedicated to comms. We have some really clear processes to follow, which is not very exciting, but they really help for, if there's an emergency, we know who's going to be collecting stories and who's going to be receiving those stories back, how we're going to disseminate those. We have a case study log, so we have case studies which we can use, which people say where they've used. We try to, a lot of what we're doing is kind of like being investigators ourselves. And so we have, for instance, we have staff prayers every week, and often that's taken over by one of our country teams. So today when we're watching staff prayers, it was taken over by some of our Middle East countries, and we're like, oh, right, that partner's doing this, let's go and follow up with that. So, we're not spoon-fed stories. We really have to go out and look for them ourselves. One of the big challenges can be connectivity, that somebody might take a bit of footage, they might do something, but then they haven't got the right connection to be able to send it back to us. Or people are somewhere seeing something amazing and what they send us back is just not really usable. But then, it can work beautifully where somebody, our country director for DRC, happened to be just in front of not like in a dangerous position, but when the volcano was exploding in Goma, he was there and he was able to do a piece to camera with the volcano kind of in the background, saying, this is what I'm seeing, this is what people are experiencing. And then we were able to use that in places like Sky News and BBC, and had really, and then other agencies were able to ring us up and go, okay, I know you're responding, we're going to give you money. So, it was just like, that was excellent. But that doesn't happen very often. And we don't have people often set up to understand what media's needs are. And they've got so much on their plate when they're either doing church and community work or they're responding to disaster, communications and media is quite low down. So a lot of the time we spend explaining to people, this is what we do, this is what we need, this is how you can help us, this is what makes news. That doesn't work so well. Yeah.
Okay, you've kind of hinted there already at capacity. In terms of Tearfund, we may be amazed to know that they don't have copious amounts of people and resource, just like the rest of us as well. So for you then, how do you make the most? Because you're placing resources, not necessarily just in the UK. How do you get the most out of every field trip, every story? What are some of the ways you repurpose and keep things going to make actually those things worthwhile when you can't just keep going and going? What would be some practical tips?
Yeah, well, I think we have a big database of wherever people travelling to, do they have the capacity to gather stories when they go there? But really, the team spends a lot of time building relationships with people, saying, okay, if you're going to that response work in Syria, please can you take photos? Please can you ask people these questions? And sometimes we get case studies back and okay, now we need to go back to these, we've got 6 regional comms people around the world who are gathering stories. Okay, but the stories we're getting back aren't great, or they're not great for media. Let's make sure we get them to ask these questions, and then we will build that in. We're also trying to build relationships with people within countries, so freelancers. So instead of saying, okay, we need to send a film crew out from here to gather this information, we have got really good freelancers like in Ethiopia, in DRC, and we're building up capacity in country. So then if something happens, okay, we know that photographer there can go and take these good pictures. So then we will try and use people in country.
Okay. And Alexandra, same question to you then, from the flip side of that. How do you make your stories go further? Maybe cost-cutting exercises. How do you maximise across digital media to make sure we can reuse, repurpose each time?
Yeah, so I think repurposing is it's probably one of our buzzwords, really, because you just want to, as much as anything, you want to make sure people see the story. And, so Jeremy Hunt didn't get on the national news for turning up to our care home, but he went on our website. So, things like that, social media, making sure that where we can, we do tell the story, and so that can be digitally. We have a magazine as well, and it's a lovely little magazine, and it'll go in there if it's good. I can't remember if Jeremy got in there, but we have lots of other stories, and that can go to your people. Like there is a degree to which not every story obviously is going to be able to get out there to a massive audience that don't know you, and you're having to do the hard work of the cut through and the kind of brand introduction. But it can go to your people, and they're precious too. And I guess in terms of sorry, so I'm going to go down a little trail here. I guess in terms of value for money, actually, when it comes to charities and supporters, your supporters who already support you are so valuable. You want to make sure that you're keeping hold of them. So in some ways, you don't really want to just always be giving your best stories to people who don't know about you. It's great to just feed back to the people who do know about you. And I think that's a really important way to look at things as well, to kind of treasure those internal relationships and gather stories that will impact your people who you've already got on board.
Can I make a little point here, just hearing about the point about repurposing and limited resources? I think I'd say that if you've got a really good case study or also a really great spokesperson, then milk them and don't be afraid to re-pitch them and pitch them over and over again. Not only because is it not that media organisations don't mind that, I actually think they actively like it because if you know that someone's going to come on and deliver and you trust them, if there's a story coming and going, you're actually going to go for them again. So a good example would be Laura Young, who is one of Tearfund's people. So I don't know if you know her, she's an environmental campaigner from Scotland who started out, she's called Less Waste Laura. She started out on zero waste. And actually I met her because I'm involved in Christians in media and I'm a mentor. And about 3 years ago, I mentored her. That's how, I'm sure she won't mind me saying that. And so I got to know her. And she was doing some stuff on Radio Scotland, but I got her on Times Radio, and I told her to contact at 5 Live, and she started going places. And honestly, every time she comes on, she's really great. She's a great spokesperson. And then she went to COP, and so we built a whole. She did a daily check-in, and we build stuff around her. So if ever I see a Tearfund thing saying Laura Young's doing blah-de-blah, I don't go, oh, here we go again. I go, right, we want that because Laura Young's a star in my book and I'll have her on any time. It's like Simon Calder. How often do you see Simon Calder on talking about travel? And people don't get bored of him. In fact, they like it. They like it. So if you've got, like in your example, if you've got like an elderly man or woman in one of your care homes who, and he or she's just completely charming, really lovely, every time she speaks or he speaks, people get misty-eyed. Just trot them out every single time. I mean it. Trot them out every single time you got a story because they sound like gold dust. And actually, what you'll hear like Lorraine Kelly. She'd go, And people talk about this thing in media, it's a really weird thing, friend of the show. And what it means is we like having on. So Lorraine, you could hear Lorraine Kelly going, and I'm delighted to be joined by Deirdre again. Deirdre's one of our, Deirdre, I love talking to you. Now, what's your memory of this particular event that's going on? And, and it's like, and that's, I think that's actually, so reusing, if you strike gold, don't dig over there, just churn the same gold around.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Tim, so much. That's really helpful. We're just going to quickly press fast forward because I really want to touch on this final issue and just look to the future slightly. Great talking about the here and now and what's worked, but we also need to be conscious that the landscape is changing. So I'd love to just pick your brains, really, the three of you, on some of the trends you're seeing in your teams and what's working, what's not, in terms of particularly the next generation, positive stories. Tim, you said on a call with me recently that you feel that kind of polished productions aren't necessarily the future, that actually, I know we're talking about radio here with you, but ultimately things don't have to be perfect in order to now be good news. You've got lots of amateurs or influencers, we're using social media, we've got our own video setups, and actually maybe we can be less polished, especially when we're in different sites around the world, and it'll still make a good story. Could you just
just very quick. So I think two things. So authenticity is really important, and then that matters, and people who really care about it, and that really comes across. And then the second thing I think is that there's so much evidence that young people, particularly, that people are avoiding news and avoiding media, and they're just ground down by the kind of misery and the difficultness of it all. And so I think there's a whole trend in journalism called solutions-focused journalism. I don't know if that means anything, but it means that what young people particularly, they're looking for answers or positive. And it's not just positive, because that ends up in that sort of rather trite good news. I like the word constructive, but it's like constructive stories, things that actually point what is being done about it. So, I mean, you'll know all this, I'm sure already, but it's like, if you're a mental health charity, it's not just kind of here's someone who's ground down by mental health, but it's here's someone who's done something about it and has managed to kind of move beyond it, deal with it, has got a sort of success story. And young people particularly want that sort of constructive, I don't want to use a positive, that sense of they don't feel powerless, that something can be done about this thing. And that's really inspiring to hear. So if you've got that sort of stuff, I think that's really good to put out there.
Sarah, could you just speak into that? Because obviously, Tearfund, you need to show the reality of the world. And of course, for some people, they'll be hit by an article or picture and go, oh my word, I mean, that's quite hard to look at. So obviously, you guys need to focus on that. That's reality. But also, you need to be hopeful in order for donors and people to support you. So how do you toe that line with this is reality, but also we don't want to leave you just feeling glum about the state of the world?
Yeah, I think there's a really big push within Tearfund to talk about very hopeful stories and to bring, communities which have been transformed rather than, this is the dreadful picture we see. But I must be honest, journalists really want to still see quite a lot of this is the dreadful picture of where we are. And sometimes there's a push within Tearfund where it's like, no, we want to show the community transformed. And I was like, yeah, but we need to show this jeopardy, this beginning of where they've come from to where they've got and what can be taken forward. So I think we're feeling the tension in our team between meeting journalists kind of where they're at. But I agree the constructive thing around like this tech solution within development is really interesting, or this innovation that's, community innovation that's really different. So I think that can be a really good story. I think we work with a lot of faith leaders around the world, and I think the stories from faith leaders about the changes in their communities and the hope the church can bring from kind of the church was there before this happened, it's supporting the community through it, and it will be there long after Tearfund's packed up its bags and gone home. So I think, being able to refer to church stories for us can be really, really positive.
Brilliant. And Alexandra, for you, obviously you are working with older people, but of course I've seen a lot of your campaigns where actually you are putting a positive outlook on this is how we age well, preparing for getting older. So even in what you're doing, you're not trying to reach 20-year-olds, but you're still bringing about that, come on, let's get that message of hope in there, aren't you?
Yeah, so we did do a campaign this year called Getting Real About Getting Older, which was very intentionally aimed at people between the ages of 40 and 60, essentially, and about getting ourselves ready to get older for later life. the evidence suggests that if you prepare in midlife, actually later life and latest life becomes that bit easier. It's challenging, whatever, but it can become that much easier. So aiming for that kind of younger audience, it's not totally unstrategic though, because that is also the audience often for us who are making, particularly when it comes to care, less so when it comes to housing, but when it comes to moving somebody into a care home, it's often a younger person who's making that decision. So for us, that's a really key audience, and that was a way to kind of reach them. I think I was just thinking about, when you said that we're going to have this question about the future, I was thinking, I don't know. I don't know. Like, in all honesty, I don't know. But I think that there are some fundamental truths that remain and that we're just going to have to keep doing, which is that we're human beings and that we want stories and we want hope, but we know that the world is a mess. And there's a degree to which we just need to keep telling the same kind of stories and just finding the different mediums. And I'll say one of the things, and this is a bit of an aside, but one of the things that's quite interesting is that we launched TikTok this year, which when you tell people that you're a care home charity on TikTok, they're like, what? Including a colleague of mine was stunned that we were on TikTok. But actually, it's a great platform for us. And it's a great platform because it reaches carers and it reaches the people who we want to bring into this incredible, challenging, but incredibly rewarding arena. So finding that sense of who your audience is as well. Again, but that's all it all kind of stays the same, but it's how we package it and how we can use it. And it'll be interesting to see how that kind of user-generated content, that much more kind of rough and ready, and some of our TikToks are pretty kind of, basic, but they can tell a great story, and how you can package that in a way that might pique a wider audience to then get out onto the more traditional media platforms as they themselves reiterate as we go forward. Will be really interesting, fascinating to watch.
Time will tell, won't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice point to kind of finish the formal conversation here. And we'd love to just open up again. I think we've got time for a couple of questions. If we can steal a mic. Thank you. Oh, we've got Tim's.
Hi, mainly a question for Tim. We send out a bunch of emails. Sorry, I'm Ben from Open Doors. We send out emails to en masse using one of to sort of like Christian platforms at least. Using a platform, and we were recently given the hard sell on this wonderful new distribution and monitoring platform, and I said, well, so can we personalize the emails? And he said, yes, and you can't. How? I can catch me over canapes later, and I will name the agility, the name of the company that slightly misled us. But I wanted to know from Tim especially how much it matters that you feel you're getting an email from a single person.
I'm not. Look, it's difficult because I run a radio station now, and I'm not myself setting up individual stories. I think I'd be tempted to say I'm not that bothered if it's an automated insert of a name, because it just feels, it doesn't, I don't even look at that because I'm there to do a job, and I'm there to kind of see what is the nugget of this thing. What I would say is that if, as I mentioned earlier about Tearfund, is if someone has actually crafted an email because they've seen you, lovely to meet you last week, but that's kind of quite different. I wouldn't worry too much, is my honest answer. It's more about what the email, what the subject line is and how quickly you get to the point is the truth. I mean, I'm only one journalist, and there might be other journalists who tell you different things. So it's really hard, isn't it? I mean, I think this whole thing about how to get a story to land and get pick-up and traction, it's a mercurial thing. We send out on Times Radio, 14 press release type emails a week with lines from guests on Times Radio with what they've said, and only 4 or 5 get picked up by newspapers and websites and so on. And it's kind of hard to know. You can't predict what's going to get picked up. But what I do know is that it's often the ones with with the punchiest stuff, and it's like right at the top. But just stuff just goes into the ether. And does that help answer the question? I wouldn't worry too much.
Hi, my name's Tim Allen. I'm from Serving in Mission. We're an evangelical mission agency. I'm comms director. Our whole purpose is to share the gospel with people who don't know it. In my experience, getting the words Jesus and gospel into the mainstream media is all but impossible. Do you have any ideas as to how we can change that?
Is that for me? I think it's really hard, I'll be honest with you. I don't think that, I mean, we could do a whole seminar on, Christianity in the media. I don't think the media is as anti-Christian as it was 20, 30 years ago, and I've got various sort of pet theories on why that might be. But I just think it's quite benign, quite agnostic. And I think that, I think what's really good is when it comes up organically, because Christians are doing really impressive stuff, and it becomes, it's clear they're doing it. Things are happening in a church hall, and it becomes part of the story. And that, I think, that's part of what's going on. But if it's a more overtly kind of evangelistic thing, then, obviously pegged to some Christian festival, that might be the reason. And I think there's stories of, Kate Botley, when she first came to fame, didn't she? She danced down the aisle and did something like that. And so but when you go on, I love it when you hear people on the media go and they say, I'm doing it because I'm just passionate about my faith. But don't kind of over-egg it. And I think that's okay. That's okay. It's honestly, it's really hard. I don't think there's an easy answer on that one. But I think it's just got to be not over-egged, authentic, kind of integral to the story, not bolted on. And yeah, that's probably a few thoughts. We could chat later if you want as well.
I think if I can just embellish that slightly, the story I said before about the intergenerational nativity, one of the bits of coverage, I don't think probably included the word gospel, but definitely basically said, this is a Christian care home, this is a Christian community, and these Christian people are celebrating this Christian festival, and isn't that lovely? And it was lovely. So I think that sense of, if it's just an authentic story about something that is authentically happening within a faith, then there is a certain amount of sympathy to it, yeah.
Hello. Agnes here from London City Mission. I've got a question about aftercare of our spokespeople. After the story's been told, after the media glare has gone away, are there any processes where we can truly look after them well?
Yeah, I mean, for us at Tearfund, we look after our spokespeople very closely. So in advance of interviews, and before we even would talk to them about media, we would spend time doing some media training with them, helping them understand what we're trying to achieve, what an outlet is like, what their audience is like. We would prepare them with some, we'd have an external trainer who would give us some training. So we handhold them the whole way through. And then afterwards, we would talk to them and debrief them and explain to them what went really well in that and what the impact of their interview was. And so we see it as an ongoing process. It's not something where we exploit them for this big event and then they never hear from us again. It used to be that I think, we have so many people, let's have lots of spokespeople. Now I'm more of the opinion, let's have 5 or, like you say, the kind of gold dust, 5 or 6 people who journalists get to know, who can rely on, and they are really close to our team. They're people who we speak to very regularly, and they're worth their weight in gold.
Hi, I'm Ali. I'm in donor communications for Alpha International. My question is entirely selfish. For Sarah and Alexandra, how do your fundraising teams and your media teams coordinate, or dare I say it, collaborate, if at all? And for Tim, when you hear about an organisation, is it Tim? Yeah, sorry. When you hear about an organisation doing a fundraising campaign, is that something you run from or something you welcome?
I'll take that on how our media team and our fundraising team collaborate. We are the same team, so we talk to each other. But no, it's a fair question. And actually, we've been doing more on the fundraising, kind of pure fundraising this year, and that has required us to kind of work out some of those patterns about how we interact, and where the best stories are going to lie for the best part of the need that we have. But no, I don't have any great, brilliant ways that teams might work together. Over to you.
We do work together, and so we have various processes where we work together. We have a member of the team who is here tonight who works between media and the fundraising group. So we have content room chats where people who are all creating content are in that Google chat room. We have a comms steering group each week where representatives from different comms team meet together and we talk about what we've got planned there, but also plan further into the future. We have content calendars, and then again, it's this relationship building with other team. It's all very, very relational at Tearfund. So we speak to social media team, we speak to the different fundraising marketing teams, and we make sure that we understand what stories they've got. So we kind of say, if we use this for the media as well, then it's going to expand and amplify what you're saying. So you don't need to keep that amazing story embargoed. You could let us use it. So that's kind of how we work together. It's all about building relationships with them and finding out what everyone's doing, really.
And just the question for me was, like, if there's a fundraising story, are we interested? Is that the question?
If an organisation's clearly wanting to raise money and these stories are part of a campaign to raise money, that's the call to action, is to donate. Is that something you run from, or you're willing to promote almost?
Oh, that's a better question than I hoped it was going to be. I thought it was going to be. I thought you were saying, if you're just saying, you know, we're doing a fundraising campaign, we want to raise £500,000, is that a story? No. That wouldn't be. But because I was going to say that, you know, the way people raise money is so extraordinary. You know, people kind of climb mountains, do all this sort of crazy stuff, and it's really hard to find anything new. But if we are interested in the story of what's happening, and the sort of the ask at the end of it, or the thing is a fundraising thing, I think that's fine. I think it's easier because actually, you know, that people in the media aren't all horrible, and actually people, you know, I've worked at the BBC, I work at Times Radio, and quite often, you know, but you do sort of feel like you want to make a difference as well. I mean, I haven't really said much about that, but, you know, some of the things that my colleagues are most proud of is when they formed a relationship with a charity and a cause, and then they have championed it, they've seen some change, they've seen some legislative change, or they've seen someone's life. You know, that's what people are. And the journalists are really proud of that. And you'd be surprised how many journalists actually they have a couple of causes they really want to champion. And I'll just tell my story in a second about Fee Glover, if I may. But, and so I think they know that you're working hard. If you've actually got to the hurdle of, you know, the story's piqued the interest, you've kind of got coverage in print or whatever, I think the journalist actually wants to say, it's their way of saying thank you. You know, if you want to support this thing, this is how you do it. And I don't think the fundraising element is in of itself a turn-off. I think the point is that it is really hard to make fundraisers that stand out because every single crazy thing has been done. One thing I might say is that I think wishful thinking by good intentioned people is a bit wishy-washy. And so, in other words, if someone says, I want to get to Christmas #1 with this charity single, they are never going to get to Christmas #1. So, but if someone says, I have raised £50,000 by wearing my wife's clothes for a year. I can't think of anything. I'm trying to invent
almost.
You know, then you go, and I'm going to do it. You know that boy? Do you know that boy who slept outside in the tent for COVID? Yeah, and he was covered 6 months in, a year and a half in, and that was really, you know, and that like is because you've actually done something. So I think a campaign can get most impact when it's almost halfway through. You've hit 50,000, you've got 50,000 to go, you've demonstrated commitment to the cause, you've got some stories to tell about what happened along the way. But saying, I'm going to row across the Atlantic, I'm just so bored of people who row across the Atlantic. And then just very quickly. So the best case study we had a really great case study recently on Times Radio, and we did a thing called Addiction Week, and so Fee Glover, who we got from the BBC, who was on a podcast called Fortunately, which you may have listened to. Anyway, so it was with a charity called AdFam, and it was all about addiction. And we had this wonderful woman, a mum, I'm going to tear up, I don't know why, but her son got into drugs, and then sort of he lived away, and he got from kind of marijuana into heroin and whatever, and it just got more and more, and she was really kind of matter of fact about it, but it was just so impactful because I found it quite relatable, as you can tell, and it was very relatable, and she was about sort of 8-minute interview, and it was just. And they're still, her son is alive, and they have some contact, and she's hung on in there, and it was really on the impact of addiction on the family. And what I really liked about it was because it was very relatable, and that was kind of really cool. But what's interesting was that Fee Glover herself she's really cares about the topic of addiction. So we did our own addiction week. You can tell by that it wasn't pegged to anything else. We sort of determined that. During my first do think about them, not you. And so she was interested in covering that story, went to a charity she knew about. Can you find me someone? They found someone. And I think that was really, that shows that, what on earth where have I come in this long-winded answer? I think it shows is that she cared about it, and they're so proud of that. They wanted to tell these stories of people who were affected by addiction. They didn't run away from it, and I think that's another great thing. If you as a charity or an organization, you find a media outlet that kind of shares your values, and you can find a journalist that wants to cover what you're talking about, and it just kind of actually they'll welcome you back on again. That's what I wanted to say.
No, thanks, Tim. I love how you said just quickly, as if I had any power to stop you there whatsoever. You were going on. Thank you so much for that. That was very helpful. I'm glad you said that. I think there may be some more questions. Thank you so much for all the questions you have asked. I think we're going to bring the official panel event to a close. So I just want to say thank you so much on behalf of Jersey Road for coming. And thank you so much to our panel for taking the time to come over and just share that wisdom with us. We trust it's been helpful to you. Could we just show our appreciation for the panel, please?